Hey guys, thank you for joining me at Completing Christ as we continue in our series, Live It Out. Living out what I say, I believe. And we kind of came off of the series we did in the book of Joshua that was entitled It's Time to Decide. And how that Joshua issues a challenge near the end of his life to the people that he was leading, that they had to decide to live in dependence upon the Lord. And that would show up in a healthy fear of the Lord. It would show up in their serving Him. And they're being willing to put aside false gods that had taken away their dependence upon the one true God. And so we started last week talking about, well, if that's where my heart is, how do I live that out? How do I live out what I say I really believe? And we started looking at Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Now, remember what the book of Proverbs is. The book of Proverbs is all about wisdom. It's wisdom statements. You know that, and wisdom is being able to take the truth of God's Word and apply it to everyday situations. To be able to take the truth of the Word and live it out. So how do I live out this commitment? How do I live out this dependence upon the Lord? And last time we looked at I've got to learn to trust Him. That I trust Him with my salvation, and I learned to trust Him with my life. And we talked about that word trust. It comes from a word in the Old Testament. It comes from a word that means to place my weight upon. That I place the weight upon the weight of my sin, upon Him at salvation. And then I have to learn to trust Him with the weight of my life, because there's times that life can be extremely heavy. And we talked about how that every detail of my life and your life is important to Him. And He wants me to learn to trust Him in every area of my life, to live in dependence upon Him, to live out what I say that I believe. Well, let's continue with that. I'm going to go back and read Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 again. And today we're going to look at the second statement in verse 5. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths, or He will make your paths straight. So I would simply say here, the last week was trust Him. This week I would say that not me. That I have to learn that I can't trust myself. That I have to trust Him. That I can't lean on my understanding about life, but I need His understanding and His perspective about life, about my situations. You know, one of the things I've learned over the years is that as I live in dependence upon Him, what I begin to see is the importance of His wisdom and His understanding in me living out life properly. You see, I can't live on the way I can't live out this relationship correctly with my own understanding of things. I need the Lord. I need His wisdom, His discernment, and His understanding, because, you see, my understanding is limited. In comparison to God's understanding of life, the one that created life, the one who has a plan and purpose for our life, in comparison to His understanding, my understanding will always be extremely limited. Now, I can grow in my understanding, and I should be growing in my understanding. How do I do that? And you've heard me say this multiple times. I spend time in the Word with Him. I spend time in prayer and conversation with Him. I need to be connected to a local church. I need Christian community. I need to be taught. I need to place myself in positions to be taught. And I need to be in accountable relationships with people that hold me accountable to doing the right thing. And as we grow, it's not that we become smarter and smarter and smarter, and we need less and less of Him. What we begin to realize is the more I know, the more I realize the importance of living in dependence upon Him, and my needing His understanding over my understanding. You know, I think oftentimes in life what we do is that we trust Him, we say we trust Him, but then we live our lives in our limited understanding, which often leads to bad choices, to wrong choices, and instead of learning simply to trust him and live in dependence upon him. I was thinking about Joshua as I was walking through this, thinking about Joshua, that Joshua did not lean on his own understanding, but he learned to live in dependence upon God. In Joshua chapter 3, it's time for him to lead the people across the Jordan River. They get to the Jordan River, it's at flood stage. He didn't make a decision there when he got to the river. He didn't make a decision based on his own understanding. He based the decision on God, what God said, on his trusting God and living in dependence on God. I believe if he would have been walking in his own understanding, he'd probably turned around and left and come back another day. It's not what he did. He told the spiritual leaders to stick their foot in the water. And what happened was, when he did, the Jordan River backed up and they walked across on dry land. I was thinking about Noah. Man, when he built the ark, think about that. It never rained at that point. And God told Noah to build a big old boat. Man, he couldn't live that out in his own understanding. There's no way he could figure that out, but he trusted God. And the whole time he was building that boat, he's sharing with people what's going to happen, and they laughed at him. They made fun of him. But he trusted what God said. He didn't have to figure it out in his own understanding. He just trusted God. What about Moses? When he got to the Red Sea and the Egyptians' armies coming after him, he could not lean on his own understanding. He had to trust God. And what happened? He did what God told him. The Red Sea parted and they walked across on dry land. What about when God told Abraham to take Isaac to Mount Moriah and offer him up as a sacrifice? That doesn't make sense in our understanding. But God knew exactly what he was doing, and Abraham obeyed. God's word says in Genesis 22, he got up early, he took everything needed, built an altar, placed his son up on there, because he simply trusted God, not his own understanding. I think about Paul in the New Testament, how Paul lived his life in total dependence upon the Lord, not trying to figure it all out, not in his own understanding or his own thinking of life, but simply from God's perspective. He was beaten, he was left for dead, he was shipwrecked, ended up in jail. Why? Simply trusting God and living in dependence upon God. You see, we've got to learn to trust him, and we've got to learn to live in dependence upon him. We can't live life trusting our own understanding, but we must be willing to trust him. God, give us understanding. Give us God-given understanding and God-given wisdom to make the right choices as we live in dependence upon you. Teach me to live my life trusting you. Teach me to live my life in dependence upon you. Help me to understand that my understanding will always be limited in comparison to yours. Your word says in James chapter 1 verse 5, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives generously. May we seek you for wisdom and for godly understanding so that we can live this life in a way that brings you glory, makes you known, and we live life in dependence upon you. Go let Jesus be Jesus in you today and have a blessed day. Thank you so much for watching Complete in Christ as we strive to teach you about the Christ life. We encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and may you have a blessed day walking with Jesus.